morning, everyone, and welcome to our November 17th, 2021 Left to Board meeting. And let's go ahead and start off with a moment of silence to remember our brothers and sisters, as well as our military folks that have passed in the line of duty, as well as passed just along in life. So let's take a moment of silence. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm here.
All right, thank you. All right, morning, Jason.
You're welcome, Dennis.
All right, everybody. So we had a moment of silence. We're going to, before us on the agenda, we do have a pretty good, robust agenda today. A lot of things to take care of. The first item of business is our approval of our minutes, and this will be from our September meeting. So at this time, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the September meeting minutes.
Move adoption.
Well, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, there's a move and a second to adopt the minutes of September, which were sent out. Discussion, comments, corrections? I'm looking to keep my chat bar open as well. So, not seeing any. Steve, do you want a roll call, or do you want simply just a
voice mode is fine.
Okay, all righty. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, our minutes from our September meeting are adopted. And the first item of business is a presentation by Director Whitmarsh, who I heard as I was sitting in a little room waiting for this meeting to start is going to be leaving us in 6 weeks.
6 weeks, yes.
Yeah.
This is my last opportunity to present to this committee, which I have been presenting to for 12 years now. And you're one of my favorite clients from the WSIB. Personally, my husband, I met him when he was a hotshot with the U.S. Forest Service on the Eniot hotshot crew in the Wenatchee area, and has kept busy as a volunteer firefighter and wildland firefighter all these years. So I always have a soft spot in my heart for what you guys do, both on the law enforcement and the firefighting side. So anyway, delighted to be here for my swan song, and I actually have great news to share with you in terms of performance today. So if we can go to my first slide. You know, I've been here 18 years. I came in as the chief operating officer. And when I first came here, I think our assets under management were, I don't know, 30, 40 billion. And when I stepped in the executive director role, they were about 56 billion, and we're now at 186 billion. I'm really proud of the growth in assets. One thing that's kind of, most people probably aren't aware, we're what you would call a cash flow neutral plan. So in other words, the contributions that come in overall are about equal to the payouts to beneficiaries. So all of that growth in assets under management is essentially from investment performance. So it's a number I'm proud of. As you well know, we do manage 17 pension funds, but we also have other very important mandates, the labor and industry trust funds, and other permanent and trust funds that benefit schools, education, scholarships, et cetera. But across all the assets that we manage, we have one mission, and that is to make money for our beneficiaries and assist in securing the financial future of many, many Washingtonians. The scope and scale of our program has also dramatically increased in the 18 years I've been here. We're in over 76 countries, across 6 continents, 49 currencies, and we have more than 14,000 different investment holdings. So we're very much a global asset manager with a very, very diversified portfolio. Next slide, please. One of the things the WSIB has benefited from over the years is a really unique and excellent governance structure. So when the legislature created the WSIB, they were very careful to balance the needs of the beneficiaries. So we have beneficiary reps on the board, along with the plan sponsors. So we have legislative reps on the board. and then advised by 5 investment professionals that are selected by the board to advise them independent of staff and consultants. The one thing I will note, Greg Markley is your representative on the board, and he was just elected vice chair of the board at the last board meeting. And Tracy Gehring was elected chair. And typically the way the handoff works is they'll serve 2 years, and then Greg would take over as chair of the board in a couple of years. So I thought that would be of interest to you. Next slide, please. In addition to having a very strong board and governance structure, we have a highly professional, talented staff, and we have about 115 employees. And when you think about 115 employees running 185 billion, it seems like a pretty lean team, and it is. We've always, in the benchmarking studies that we participate in, we always tend to run quite a bit leaner and at a lower cost than our peer funds. We have a lot of external investment managers, though, that help us in deploying that capital across the globe. We have 130 external investment managers and partners across all of our asset classes. Those relationships are very important. And one of the things the WSIB is very good at is due diligencing external managers. So it's really rare that we have any kind of failure in our external investment management group. And that's because of the very careful and close monitoring and due diligence that we do on those. We have 2 offices, Olympia and Seattle. The opening of the Seattle office, which is probably when I was still the chief operating officer, has been really helpful in terms of recruitment and retention. People who have partners or spouses who are looking for work at the same time as their partner comes to work for us. There's sometimes better opportunities for them in the Seattle metro area. And some people just prefer a more urban environment. For me, I live out in the country. I live on a ranch. I love the access to a rural lifestyle that Olympia gives me. But I've learned that many of my employees share a different view. So right now, we are in 115 offices because we are, like you, we're all working out of our homes. We are hoping to return to office gradually. We have what we call a soft opening, where people who are fully vaccinated are able to come in and, come in 1 or 2 days a week, get used to coming back into an office. But we haven't done a hard opening yet. We're still waiting to see how things go. Next slide, please. This just outlines all the various funds for you, and of course highlighted is the one that you're responsible for. Next slide. And this shows the dollar value of those funds, and what you'll see under the 2 left funds, that they're nearly 27 billion of the 148 billion that is all commingled in the single commingled trust fund. So it's very, again, like I said before, you're a very important client. And you have a big chunk of the commingled trust fund. One of the things that is unique about the State Investment Board is that we have, unlike other states, we combined all these public employee funds into a single investment strategy and a single fund. And what that does is allows us to have significant scale in the market. It gives us great negotiating power on fees, gives us access to top tier partners. So even though there's many different benefit designs behind each of these plans, they do share a common investment strategy. Next slide, please. This one, I show this to you every year and gets updated, and it's a very busy chart, but I think it's in one page really describes the investment strategy and the results of the State Investment Board. I've already referenced the upper left-hand, the historical market value, the increase over the last 10 years from 50 some to 148. And again, even though we have 185 in assets under management, this is just the retirement fund, the commingled trust fund. And it shows on the upper right-hand side, it shows the volatility of returns. And I always, particularly when I'm talking to policymakers, I really like to kind of pause on this for a moment. And even though we have had stellar return over time, you see how volatile it is. And so investing is a long horizon game. I always say it takes a real stomach to be a good investor. You have to be able to look to have conviction in your strategy and know that over time it will deliver the results that we need to pay our beneficiaries. But it can be a wild ride at times. This last year, of course, as everyone knows, the markets have just been screaming, and we have some extraordinary results from 2021. If you look down on the lower right-hand side, market value and returns, you see that the total commingled trust fund has over time essentially far exceeded the assumed rate of return that the legislature has set for us. And of course, what that translates into, and Matt Smith, the state actuary, does all these numbers for the legislature, but it does transfer into lower contribution rates, which of course allows the legislature to use revenues for other important policy initiatives. So our contribution is pretty significant in terms of state finances. And then the left-hand side shows our asset allocation, and we are known for being heavily overweight compared to peers to private assets. Next slide. The one question I often get, and so Allison Tucker, who's taking over for me, prepared this when she was running risk management and asset allocation. We often get questions about our risk profile. How much risk are we taking to get the return? And traditionally, people think of private assets like private equity, private real estate as being more risky. But what you see is every asset class has a risk spectrum. And the way we construct our portfolios within that risk spectrum does a lot to mitigate some of the risks. And so we'll start with our highest risk class, private equity. And if you see over on the farthest right-hand side, venture capital would be considered the riskiest. Large buyouts in the middle and mezzanine debt to the left. The bulk of our portfolio would be concentrated in the large buyout space. In public equity, we're invested across that entire spectrum, and some of it does depend on what portfolio that we're managing and for what client. Real estate, we would probably be somewhere in the middle on that. We do not heavily lever our portfolio. We do have emerging market exposure, but the bulk of our exposure is in developed markets and on the less leveraged end. Despite that, we still have phenomenal results. Our real estate program has returned equal to our public equity program, and yet with lower risk. So that just gives you a sense of how even within an asset allocation that overall could indicate a certain level of risk, there's many ways to, in constructing portfolios, to mitigate that. Next slide, please. When you think about what it takes to be a well-funded pension system, you on this board would know more than anyone, it takes three things. It takes really good benefit design, but it takes adequate contributions to support those benefits, and then it takes a good investment program. Your board really takes care of the first two for your fund. But we've been empowered to take care of the third, which is the investment returns. And so we're proud of our contribution to having one of the best funded pension systems in the nation. Next slide. As Chair Lawson noted, I am retiring at the end of the year, and so we are in a major leadership transition as we go forward. I'm very, very pleased that Allison Tucker, who has been our Chief Investment Officer the last 2 years, she took over when Gary Brubaker retired, but she's been with us almost 12 years. She came into the public equity team. She came from Seattle. She used to work in the family office of the Bill and Melinda Gates family office as an investment officer. That's one of the most well-respected endowment funds and family offices in the country. But she was born and raised in Olympia and wanted to raise her own family here. So we were really lucky to be able to snag her. And she's grown up with the organization and is now taking the top spot. So we've been working very closely together for the last year. I realize, I think all of us think about all knowledge you have rattling around in your head that you want to transfer to someone, and probably inundating her with more advice than she ever needs. But so far it's gone really, really well. We also have hired Kurt Gavigan, and some of you in the legislative branch would recognize Kurt's name. He just joined us on November 1 as our Chief Operating Officer. He was the staff director for the nonpartisan Senate staff. So we're thrilled to have Kurt join us. And we're actively recruiting for Allison's replacement for the next chief investment officer. We also have another number of other retirements coming up over the next year. So I think number one initiative that the board is really committed to is just helping through this leadership transition as we have essentially a generational movement. Another one of the big projects that I was determined to complete before I retired is this tap into TDF. And if that's not a mouthful of acronyms, I don't know what is. But essentially, the commingled trust fund performance has benefited from this overweight to private assets. But the deferred comp plan has never been able to access those assets. So we came up with what I consider a very interesting investment product innovation, where we're taking a slice of the commingled trust fund, the TAP, and putting it into the target date funds. And the target date funds are the default option for people entering into deferred comp or Plan 3's, their self-directed portion. So essentially what this does is we've taken an existing product, the target date funds, we've put a sleeve of the commingled trust fund into that. And so essentially we now have access to private assets in those target date funds. It's been a long, complicated project, but we're the first in the nation to do this, and we're being watched carefully. But it definitely improves the return and risk profile of those target date funds. The other big new initiative coming is the development of the investment plan for the Washington Cares program, and that's the long-term services and support, better known as the long-term services support plan. We are just in early discussions with the commission that oversees that, and with the subcommittee that's working on investments for that. And basically that could end up being a very large portfolio that we'll be managing over time, but we're in the early stages of onboarding that. And then another major initiative is DEI. Not only these comments are focused internally, but the board, I've been very active in gender equity issues within the investment industry and have been a strong promoter and spokesperson for gender equity. My board said, that's great, we're glad that you've done that, but we'd like you to expand your lens and focus on broader diversity initiatives in the investment industry. And so we've used our platform and our voice to encourage the broader industry to pay close attention to DEI issues. And one of the things that I think about is the kind of performance that we produce is completely dependent on human skill and talent. And if you limit the pool from which you're drawing that talent, you're going to limit your potential. So this is a really important initiative for us, both from a social justice perspective, but more importantly, from a good performance perspective. Last slide, please. So in summary, we continue to stay committed to our mission and to making money for you. That's our goal. Continuing to focus on this transition as we promote essentially the next generation of leaders in the organization, making sure that they know that mission number one is fiduciary duty to you and your colleagues. And we are also, as we become more complex, as the global environment becomes more complex and investing becomes more complex, just making sure that we have the resources needed. We are asking for a supplemental budget this year. It's the first time in, 12, 13 years we requested a supplemental. But with Washington Cares and with other new initiatives that have been given to us over the last decade, our staffing has not grown quite commensurate with that. So we are asking for a little additional help this year with the legislature. And then finally, what's on everyone's minds is these ESG factors, climate, diversity, societal issues. And we're working very hard to integrate those into our investment process without compromising fiduciary duty. So we're looking at where alignment of social issues, environmental issues align with good returns. And we've made a lot of progress on that. Finally, I think you all know you can't read the news without recognizing we are in a very interesting geopolitical environment worldwide, and of course COVID and the impact of that. There's a lot of unknowns out there. We have to continue to stay on top of those issues and adapt our program to what is a very fluid environment. So stay tuned. With that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions for Director Whitmarsh? Yes, sir. Senator Hawley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not even a question. Teresa, I just want to tell you what a pleasure it's been, working with you since I've been on the board. And I got to tell you, just to remind everybody here that I had the opportunity to attend an international symposium on private equities here, that European North American continent group. And you mentioned how you might be a little bit weighted more heavily into private equities than most. As a result of that, the reputation that our state investment board and as you in leadership, of the SIB is known internationally. I mean, it was almost comical when I asked about that, and they just said, "You're Washington State." In other words, we were so early, and we were so good, and we were so prescient setting this up and having the authority to go this direction. A lot of states didn't have the authority to do so. That absolutely want to applaud you and thank you for your service here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me.
Other comments, questions for Reggie Center? Director Whitmarsh.
I'd also like to say thank you, Teresa. You were my favorite landlord there for many, many, many years. And you guys, you were always very gracious in the way that you treated us, allowed our team to participate in SIB events. You were thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. And if any of you get a chance, you'll be shocked if you go back and look at your old offices. All the walls have been blown out. We've got all new. We've got that whole first floor, one big area now. But so my staff is very thankful to you. Though of course no one's in the office right now, or very few. But when we're finally back, we'll be ready.
Comments? I have a question for you, just in regards to the transition. You said Allison's been working with you, which I think is great. Too many unfortunate organizations, including fire, probably the police services, we don't have the luxury or the ability to train the new people coming in and hand off a lot of our knowledge that is leaving. How long has that been going on? You said a year about, or? Yeah. I mean, and it's actually been going on longer, because when she stepped into the CIO, the Chief Investment Officer role, obviously I worked very closely with her predecessor, Gary Brubaker. So she probably got more advice than she wanted from both Gary and I as she stepped into that role. But the board was really good in thinking far ahead. So I wanted to start, what I had wanted to do is announce in the spring, even though, the whole board knew when I was going to retire. I was going to announce in the spring and give it about a 6-7 month process. But Joel Sachs, who was our chair at the time, Tracy's now chair, but Joel said, you know what, let's back this up, because we really want to be super thoughtful about how we do this. And they ended up hiring Heidrick and Struggles. They have a board succession and CEO succession practice. And so we got the leading expert who advises organizations on succession planning. And he came in and took the board through a really thorough
4-month process, 5-month process prior to me announcing and prior to launching a search. And ultimately, through that process, they decided that internal promotion was the smartest thing to do. They did an informal survey of the landscape and who's out there, presented candidate profiles to the board, but ultimately decided not to go for a full-blown search because they had their candidate internally. So during that process, I of course spent a lot of time with Allison. First of all, just getting her comfortable with taking the role, as it became clear the board was going to be real interested in her. Just assessing whether she wanted to, she loves the role of CIO, whether she wanted to take on these more external facing responsibilities, but she's game, and the board made the decision, and it's gone real well.
I applaud you for thinking ahead. So it's something, like I said, it's not the luxury for everybody. So good for all of you. When do we, Steve, I don't know when Allison will be in front of us. Do you have any idea? I'm just curious.
It'll probably be next year. And Senator Rivers and Wolf have their hands raised for questions as well.
Got it. Go ahead. Thank you.
Senator, please. Yeah.
Me?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm not going to tangle with Wolf, so if you needed to go first. Hey, Teresa, I just want to add my appreciation for your years of service, remarkable work that you've done. And while we've never worked closely, you are fairly legendary. And so that's great. And then I also would like to share with my fellow board members that Kurt Gavigan is one of the most impressive human beings you will ever meet. And we are in very good hands there. So for any of you who have not met Kurt, it is well worth your time to get to know him. And just some of you may know I am a very tough critic, and I can find nothing to be critical about when it comes to Kurt Gavigan. So thanks to Teresa, and what a great get for us to get Kurt Gavigan.
Can I just make one comment on that, Senator Rivers? One of the things that was the most worrisome to Allison stepping into this role is she didn't really have legislative facing experience or any kind of policy experience. I did because of my years at Labor and Industries years ago. And so and again, this was in consultation with the board, we decided we really needed a legislative pro, someone who was well respected, knew the environment, and could assist her not only in just running the operations, but also providing perspective and knowledge on the process. So that's music to my ears to hear your comment that we picked right. So I'll pass that on to Allison. She'll be thrilled.
Wolf, go ahead.
I just wanted to underscore the gratitude for Teresa's service. Thank you so much. You will soon be able to look back on an enormous amount of achievement, summed up well in the last slide you shared with us.
Thank you.
Thank
Wolf.
you.
Thank you so much. It's been fun working with you over the years.
Thank you.
Wish you well. Wish you well on your ranch.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be great. Well, thank you so much. And, I'm going to still stay involved in the industry, so you might see me around. I've been teasing my colleagues that I'm going to come back to the open public meeting and ask them tough questions.
Yeah. You got a ringer in the audience.
It's my retirement now. All right. Well, thank you so much, and good luck to all of you. Happy holidays. Bye.
All right. Steve, still there?
Yes.
All right.
So
looks like it leads us into item number 3. So I'll just turn it over to you.
yeah, this Jacob's been doing a series of educational presentations all interim long, and you at the September meeting, the board asked to begin the development of a potential benefit improvement recommendation for December. So this is the first step in that process. And we're calling it a tiered multiplier. So that's a new term, but I will turn it over to Jacob to run you through where we're at right now.
Okay, good morning. For the record, Jacob White, staff to the board. Get this going. Okay, the issue in front of the board today is that a benefit improvement purchase using the BIA should meet the policy goals of the board while also adhering to the legislative intent of the BIA. We've gone, as Steve said, we've gone in depth on these issues this interim. So today, I'm going to briefly touch on some background information and then review some policy decision points that Left to staff need from the board in order to draft a potential benefit improvement bill and start working with OSA on pricing that benefit, hopefully before the December meeting. So quick background, when the legislature created the BIA, they recognized in the intent section that Left to members work shorter careers because of the physical demands and risk of the profession, and that the current benefit formula is inadequate because it is designed for longer careers. So why isn't the current benefit formula enough? The income replacement standard for retirement is usually cited at around 60%, and that's the 60% number is often a minimum. You may remember a previous presentation I gave where I used the 80%, which you will see a lot. If you just Google it, you'll see that in a lot of different publications, but 60% is often cited as, at a minimum. So the benefit formula for all of the state's pension systems is the same. It's 2% times years of service times final average salary. So using that formula to reach the 60% replacement goal, a member would have to work a 30-year career. So how close do Left to members get to the 60% goal? Here's just a breakdown of the average member benefit. The average retiree is able to replace approximately 47% of their pre-retirement income. And the 10,000 number there is just, I rounded that to make, the math easier for this presentation. So the board has discussed policy goals of purchasing a benefit improvement using the BIA. The most discussed goal has been that the benefit should apply as broadly as possible, meaning that it should provide a benefit to as many members as possible while also recognizing the limitations of the cost of the benefit. The board has discussed how the BIA was funded by transfers from the Left Plan 2 Trust Fund, which contains contributions made by active and retired Left 2 members. Therefore, most members should receive a benefit since they have either already helped pay for it, since they've already helped pay for it through these past contributions. And then also there's been discussion around prioritizing a larger benefit for members who spend a career in Left Plan 2 versus those who just work, 5 or so years. And then another policy goal that's been discussed is retention, which has been an ongoing issue of Left 2 professions. And so one of the primary goals of any pension plan is to recruit and retain the most talented employees. And so it's been discussed as far as using the benefit improvement to potentially improve retention of Left members. So we've looked at that a bit this interim. Okay, so board staff has developed some policy options based on these board discussions and identified some of the pros and cons based on the policy goals just discussed. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the lump sum benefit. And so we've discussed a $20,000 lump sum payment to all retirees. Some of the pros of this is that it would be very simple to administer, simple to price for the actuary's office, and could be seen as potentially being the most fair option since everyone gets the same amount. Cons of that go back to that no proportionality to years of service, just meaning that if someone worked 5 years, they get the same as someone who worked 30, and that may not be seen as fair to members. And then another option we developed was to address that proportionality issue was $100 per month of service. And that would include a minimum of $20,000 payment for members who retire due to disability or for the beneficiaries of someone who dies in the line of duty. So some of the pros of this is getting at that goal of a benefit value proportionate to years of service. And then some of the cons are mostly around that it would be more complex to administer and price. So here's just some examples for those who don't want to quickly try doing the math in their head of how that $100 per month of service would break down. So for 5 years, that would equal a $6,000 benefit, 10 years, $12,000, 20 years, $24,000, and 25 years of service, $30,000. And just as a reminder from a previous slide, the average left retiree has around 23 and a half years of service. So next benefit option that the board has discussed is that tiered multiplier for active and new members. So the tiered multiplier benefit would increase the plan benefit multiplier from 2% to 2.5% for the years of service 15 through 25. Some of the pros of that is that it would improve retirement income so that retirees can be closer to the 60% income replacement goal, while at the same time incentivizing members to remain in LEF 2. A con of this is that it does not provide a benefit to members who work less than 15 years. So board staff did not identify a second option for this benefit, as there wasn't really any discussion of issues with this benefit beyond the fact that that not all active members will work long enough to get the tiered multiplier benefit. But because of a potential issue with with active members who've already contributed to the BIA through their contributions, a way to address that was that active members would have an option between a lump sum payment or a tiered multiplier. So for they could work with DRS to determine which option would be better for them. And so obviously for those with less than 15, the lump sum is going to be a better option for them. So moving forward in this presentation, I'm going to work off that assumption of active members getting this choice of benefit between the tiered multiplier benefit and a lump sum benefit. And I'll have actually coming up next, a better breakdown of that. So yeah, with that in mind, I thought it'd be helpful to have a breakdown of who would be eligible for what benefit. As a reminder, we discussed having a date in the bill that determined whether a member was eligible for the lump sum benefit or the tiered multiplier benefit. I went ahead and used February 1st, 2021 as that date in these materials. So this first table just breaks down what benefit members who retired prior to February 1st, 2021 would be eligible for. I'm not going to walk you through line by line this table or the next tables, but just wanted you to know that we've walked through these different scenarios, started engaging with DRS and the actuary's office to make sure we've thought out every possible situation, and I'm sure there will be more that need to be added to this. And so next, this table is for members who were active as of February 1st, 2021. This includes that choice between the lump sum or tiered multiplier. And I did want to draw your attention to the bottom of this table of inactive members. So members who are inactive, how they are treated so those are people who were left members, have left service, but are not either eligible to retire or haven't retired yet. if they are vested, they would have the choice of lump sum or tiered multiplier at retirement. So they wouldn't be able to get a lump sum now, but at retirement, they would have that choice. If they're inactive and not vested, they would not receive a benefit. But if they're inactive and not vested and they return to left employment and later become vested, they would then have that choice of lump sum or tiered multiplier. And the policy thought behind that is that they contributed their contributions before they left service went to that BIA, so they would be treated similarly to active members. Tried to go back to those policy goals for figuring out all these different situations. And then the last table, which is much easier, is how new members are treated. So new members are not eligible for the lump sum, and they would only be eligible for that tiered multiplier. And that's because they did not contribute to the funds that are in the BIA. So wanted to just give you one example of how this benefit option would work for an active member. So a member who is 45 years old with 20 years of service credit, they work for an additional 10 years and retired age 55 with an AFC of 10,000. This member would have two benefit options at retirement. Option one, this is their normal retirement benefit of 6,000, plus they would also be eligible for a lump sum payment of 36,000. And so that's obviously not using the flat 20,000. Went ahead and used the more complex one for option for this one for you to see that. Or they could go with option two, which is that increased multiplier, and have a monthly benefit of $6,500. And so at retirement, they would work with DRS to get these options and then have to make a decision of which they have a preference for. And so this one, just doing the math, it would take 6 years of those extra pension payments to equal the lump sum payment. So I think that's the type of thing that members would be looking at the time of retirement. So other decisions that went into this, I already talked about the date for determining benefits. And just as a reminder, we talked about this a couple of times previously, but the thought behind backdating it instead of having an effective date in the future would be that this way the bill doesn't influence retirement decisions, causing potential issues for employers and stress for members about, what decision should I make? Should I, would there be a potential wave of early retirements or people holding out longer? There would already be that just demarcation line would have already happened. And then another thing that's been discussed a few times has been the option to purchase an annuity with the lump sum benefit. That would be something members would be interested in, instead of taking that lump sum, being able to have an annuity that's paid out over time. Okay. And then this last issue here is that the previous benefit improvements to Left Plan 2 have been paid for through contribution rate increases, and the BIA is a new method for funding a benefit improvement, and it has never been used. The intent of the BIA was to pre-fund a benefit improvement so that there would be no impact on contributions. However, the current Left Plan 2 funding policies would result in a contribution rate increase, even if there is enough money in the BIA to fully purchase the benefit improvement. So under the current funding policies, a benefit improvement would result in an increase to liabilities of the plan. And there's no current policy for using assets in the BIA to offset that increase in liabilities. Therefore, the board must determine a policy that allows the assets in the BIA to offset the increase in liabilities caused by a benefit improvement. So there is no increase in the required contributions. So I have two options here on how to deal with that issue. The first is to develop a policy in consultation with OSA that allows the assets in the BIA to offset the increase in liabilities from the benefit improvement, so that there is no increase in the required contributions. And that's to to develop that immediately. So this would allow the board to immediately address the issue, and it would also allow OSA to use the new funding policy in its 25-year cost impact for the fiscal note. And this would give the legislature the opportunity to see the long-term cost impact of the benefit improvement. However, the issue is it does not give much time for the board to work with OSA to identify and study this potential solution. Option 2 would be to fix the rates for the remainder of the current biennium and the next biennium according to the board's current funding policy, and then develop a policy as described in option 1. And I should have added, for the first option, it would also be to fix the rates. So under both of these options, it fixed the rates. And really the decision point here is around whether to develop the policy immediately or to develop it later while the rates are frozen. So for option 2, waiting to develop that policy, it gives the board time to work with OSA to identify options and then study those options. However, without such a policy, in the bill, the long-term cost in the fiscal note would reflect current law. And as discussed already, the current law would not reflect the intended rate reductions from the BIA. Therefore, the long-term cost of the bill would not be accurately reflected in the fiscal note for legislation. And it would show a cost for the benefit improvement, even if there is enough money transferred over from the BIA to purchase the benefit. It would still show a cost in the actuarial fiscal note that the legislature would have. Okay, so as I discussed at the beginning of this presentation, in order for staff to move forward with analysis of this proposal at the December meeting, we need direction on these options from the board. Staff will take your decisions on these options and work with OSA and probably DRS also to price and provide further analysis for the December meeting. So the options here are, once again, the lump sum benefit. Option 1A would be the $20,000 lump sum payment to all retirees. And then option B would be that $100 per month of service with the minimum payment for catastrophic duty and duty death beneficiaries.
Why don't we pause here and give the board members a chance to ask questions and then potentially take action on this first decision.
Questions?
Hi, Mr. Chair, this is Mark Johnston.
Go ahead, Mark.
Can you hear me?
I can. I just see a couple hands too going up. So go ahead, Mark. I'll get to Jason. I just see their hands. Go ahead.
So in order to facilitate the discussion, and I was in president for a long time, we used to talk about the motions before they were actually made. So this is just, to me, it seems a more efficient way. I'd like to make I move to adopt the following 3 choices for the bill under the options that we're looking at. Under lump sum benefit, I move to adopt option 1B, that is $100 per month of service and a minimum of $20,000 for catastrophic and duty disability retirees and duty death survivors. Under the tiered multiplier, I move to adopt option 2A, which will increase the plan benefit multiplier from 2 to 2.5% for years of service between 15 and up to 26. And under the implementation, I move to adopt option 3A, which includes developing a policy as part of this bill. And then I'll reserve my comments for the motion to later and let other people ask or comment or say whether they're for or against the motion.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I need
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Tarina Rose Watson, and I would like to second that motion.
All right. Thank you, Tarina. I was going to call for that. You're ahead of me. Good. All right. So we do, for the purpose, as Mark said, for discussion, we do have a motion made and it has been seconded. It is in order. for items 1B, 2A, and 3A. Got that right? Looking at the screen. And I'll open up for discussion. And I don't know if Jason or Ade, who was first, I'm sorry. Jason, I'll go with Jason. Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions, Jacob, just to clarify on implementation on option 1. You mentioned, so both of those options involve fixing rates for 5 years. Is that correct?
For 3 years.
3 years. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. And my second question is on future a future hire. So let's say an officer or our firefighter is hired in 2025. Is that person that's hired in 2025, assuming that this bill is law, does the 2.5% multiplier implement for him just like it would anybody else after the February 2nd date, that person's option would be at 15 years, they'd go to 2.5, and then 26, they'd go back to 2%. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Right, Ade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Jacob. I think this is well presented information, and I actually reasonably agree with the proposal on the floor. My question to you, Jacob, is across the country, how many other entities have more than 2% multipliers?
I'm going to ask Steve to maybe rescue on me that one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Ade, we did.
Can I call you back?
Ade, we did a study. The board did a study several years ago, so it might be a little bit out of date. We looked at statewide plans around the country, and then we also looked at a number of the top or the largest local government plans, major cities and counties like LA County or City of Houston, for instance. What we found is among statewide plans, the 2% multiplier at that time was about average. That's where you saw the multiplier for statewide plans. But as soon as you went to the larger municipal plans, then you saw more of the 2.5 or even some 3.0 multipliers that were used. But that tended to be for those larger municipal plans.
Okay. Also, because of the status of the economy today, did we look at, I think some of the economists are predicting that in the next year or so, that we'll be going into recession. So what that means, at least, looking at this closely, what the impact will have on our members and also the employers and all of that, which means the revenue source to the employers may be greatly affected. So in the implementation option, will we take into consideration setting up the policy to make sure that at least maybe for the next 3 years or 5 years or whatever, that the rate would not increase where it would greatly affect the employer that may also suffer a great deal revenue stream, at least based on what the economists are saying, that we're heading into another recession. Can we do that?
Jacob, are you okay with me answering that question?
Yes, please.
It's, Ade, your question is kind of a follow-up of a presentation that I did in October, where I was trying to identify all the different potential drivers on contribution rates in the future that we're looking at here for LEF 2. In particular, we've got the potential for changing economic assumptions. The board will talk about that a little bit later this meeting. And there was also as Teresa mentioned, the investment returns from last year were extraordinarily good. And then there was the potential cost of the benefit improvement. Under if the policy, the motion was for option 3A for implementation. Under that, the idea would be that the cost of the benefit improvement would be offset, and therefore you wouldn't see a rate increase as a result of this benefit improvement. You would see a rate decrease as a result of the board's policy that you go to the 90% floor when you are over 105% funded, which the plan currently is, and which it expects to, looks like it's going to remain. And then you would see a slight rate increase from if you adopted the new economic assumptions later on. The net impact of all of those three is a little bit hard to predict on day. We might not have it until December, but based on the information we had in October, you would end up seeing a slight rate decrease in the short term. And then as long as the plan remained at above 105%, that slight rate decrease would remain in effect. And at least the initial projections look like, mainly because of the size of the investment returns, you'd stay at that slight rate decrease for the next 25 years. Now, the actuary did some very preliminary work on what the funded ratio would be if all of these different things came into place, and I talked a little bit about that in October. Your question about how much reserve, in a sense, would there be to cover a recession is hard to answer, but it looks like you're still probably talking about, if all three of those things happened, benefit improvement, that was the cost of that was offset, and you adopted the new assumptions later on in this meeting that were recommended by OSA, that by the time all the gains from last year were phased in, you'd probably be somewhere around 115 or 116% funded. So you'd still have some significant reserve there to deal with a potential recession. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yes, it did. Thank you.
Are there other questions for either Jacob or Steve? I apologize. I'm trying to see hands up and I'm looking at the chat window. Somebody's got something. All right, before us, we do have a motion. Again, the motion's been made and seconded. It is in order. Steve, are we same kind of vote? Just call it out. You're muted, sorry. Steve? Jacob, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Maybe Steve froze. Not really.
He's on.
Sorry, there we go. If the vote is unanimous, voice vote is fine, but if the vote is not unanimous, then a roll call vote would be preferred.
All right.
Agreed. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Dor. All right. Again, motion's before us. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? All right, thank you. I would, Steve, I comfortably say that that was unanimous. So,
Yes, thank you.
all righty. Thank you, Jacob, for the information. Steve, thanks for answering some of the other questions. And then,
Yeah. Jacob's going to be working on, he's already been working on a bill draft, but we'll incorporate your decisions today into getting some final bill language over to OSA as quickly as possible so that they can begin working on the fiscal analysis. It will be very difficult for them to have like a full fiscal note ready by December. But they expect to have at least some preliminary or some estimate type pricing available for the December meeting. And then we'll have a bill draft and all the other materials for your final vote in December.
great. Thank you, Steve. All right, item number 4 is our interrupted military service. Looks like it's a final presentation. Looks like it's back to Jacob, Steve, unless you have anything else to add for it. Jacob.
Okay. For the record, Jacob, staff to the board. Interrupted military service credit. So once again, the issue in front of you today is, should eligibility for no-cost interruptive military service credit be expanded from those who earned campaign medals for their service to also include those who earned expeditionary medals? The board studied this issue last year as required by the legislature. The board voted to defer until next year, this year, making a recommendation. So you expressed support, last year the board expressed support of the policy to expand. However, you also expressed concerns regarding the cost of the benefit and the unknown revenue impacts from COVID-19. Yeah, you didn't predict all the good news that Teresa shared in her presentation. Also, since this proposal being considered would be retroactive, the board did not see much harm to members to wait a year until the dust had settled on the unknowns last year before making a recommendation. So just once again, I know you've heard this many times, but quick background on interruptive military service credit benefits. A member qualifies for this benefit when they take a leave of absence to serve in the military and return to their employer after their service. There are currently 2 types of service credit. There's the fully subsidized, also known as no-cost interruptive military service credit, and then the partially subsidized, where the member pays the member contributions for that service credit. These are the same benefit requirements across all of the states' plans 2 and 3, not just LEF. So eligibility for that no-cost service credit. To be eligible, the military service must have earned the member a campaign badge or medal for their service, or they must have served in a period of war. But it's really that campaign badge or medal that is where people over the last 20 plus years have qualified for this benefit. So what is the difference between a campaign medal or an expeditionary medal? There's a few different definitions of these medals, which does cause some issues with trying to explain this to people, but just taking some of the definitions we found from the DoD, the main difference is often that the campaign medal is for members who are deployed to the geographic areas where the combat is actually occurring, and the expeditionary medal is for members deployed in support of those combat operations. but who are not in that geographical area. Although I will say over time, those definitions have been difficult because those lines have been blurred. So I have a few examples of how expanding this benefit to expeditionary medals would work in different situations that left two members may be in. The first one here is for active members. An active left two member who takes leave from their left position for military service and earns an expeditionary medal for that service and then returns to their left position. Under this proposal, the member would earn no cost service credit up to 5 years. And then an active member who has already purchased subsidized service credit for their service where they earned an expeditionary medal would receive a refund. Example 2 is for retirees who purchased service credit already. Under this proposal, the retiree would receive a refund from DRS for the payment they made to purchase that partially subsidized service credit, and then they would continue to receive the same monthly pension payment that they had been. And then example 3 is retirees who have not purchased service credit, but who would now qualify because of earning an expeditionary medal. So under this proposal, the member would have their benefit recalculated by DRS prospectively to include the additional no-cost service credit that they would now be eligible for. But they would not receive a retroactive payment adjusting their benefit from their retirement date. It would just be from the effective date of the bill forward. I wanted to share those examples because those were some questions that have come up since this has been considered the last few years. And so the update that I have for you today is the actuarial fiscal note. Just as a reminder, we were able to get some, the actuary's office priced this last year, and then right before session started, we heard back from the Department of Defense on a request we had made with some updated data, and the actuary's office wanted to take a look at that and revisit their fiscal note from last year. And so they had an opportunity to do that and got back to us for this meeting. And there was a slight increase to the budget impacts, but that increase did not result in an additional increase to the contribution rates. So the contribution rate stayed the same as 2 basis points for employees, 1 for employer, and 1 for state. And then the select committee actually met yesterday. So when I wrote this slide, I didn't know what they were going to do, but they met yesterday and they voted to endorse a bill for expansion of the benefit to service where the member earned an expeditionary medal. So they approved the same bill language that's in your materials today. And what would be option 1 in front of the board today. So options in front of the board today are to take our option 1 to expand no cost interrupted military service credit to include service where a member earns an expeditionary medal, or option 2 is for the board to not take any action and to continue to limit eligibility for no cost interrupted military service credit to that service where a campaign medal was earned and not where an expeditionary medal was earned. So
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'd like a motion to adopt option 1, to expand no cost interrupted military service credits.
All right. Is there a second?
Jeff Holy seconds.
All right, Senator Holy, thank you. So a motion is before us. Motion is in order, made and seconded. Let's go ahead and open up for discussion or comments. Jason, I still see your hand. Did you want to speak on your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to state that in addition to what we've discussed ad nauseum over the last 3 years on this, is specifically speaking towards a lot of these members are serving in our country right now. They're reservists that have been activated. They're supporting multiple COVID relief efforts in our country. Often in the states that they are a police officer in or a firefighter in. or I have several members that are deployed globally in support of COVID relief efforts in other parts of the world. So I just wanted to make a note to that because not everybody knows that they're actually doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Checking again for hands up or comments. Wolf, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's important to dissolve the distinction between campaign medal and expeditionary medal for a couple of reasons. I think that, as mentioned by Jacob, the distinction is blurring and will blur more over time. I think in a more fundamental way, as I understand it, the individual who may be called up and deployed has little choice or decision about which condition they are placed in, but they're serving nonetheless. It wasn't up to them to not be eligible for a campaign medal. It was up to them to respond when called upon, as they do when they're in uniform for us in the firefighter or law enforcement service, and as they will when they're in a green uniform or other uniform for us upon call up. So I think the distinction should be dissolved as we see it, and I fully support option one.
Thank you, Wolf. There are other comments. And I apologize, I just have to click through my screen to see if I'm missing anybody. All right, not seeing any other comments. The motion before us is for option number one. Again, it is motion is made and second is in order. Go ahead and call all those in favor of the motion. Please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.
Looks like number 5, Steve. It looks like we're at the actuarial valuation results. I'm not sure.
Yes.
It's Mitch.
The Office of the State Actuary performs an actuarial valuation every year, every other year. That's used to set rates, and which was the case last year. What is come to be called the off-year valuation results is what Mitch is going to present to you now, and he's also going to talk about some changes that OSA has made in the terms of the methodology for those off-year valuations. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mitch.
All right, thanks for the intro, Steve. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Mitch DeCamp, Office of the State Actuary. So as Steve said, I'm going to be presenting on the 2020 actuarial valuation. So this is June 30, 2020. So I'm taking you all the way back to summer of 2020. This is an off-cycle, non-rate setting valuation, so informational only. Don't have to worry about any voting here. So this might sound like kind of old results here, but this is the timing we do present these off-cycle results to you. And I still think we can find some valuable information here. I will also note for you, I have a gorgeous 4-month-old baby girl downstairs. I gave her a stern talking to that she was supposed to be quiet during this presentation, but being reasonable is not her strong suit right now. And if you hear any crying in the background, I apologize for that.
That's okay, because we often have to tell Jason Granneman to stop crying too. So don't worry about it.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. So for today's
they'll just cover up our crying when we read the charts. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. So for today's presentation, I'm going to cover some of the background on some of those new off-cycle valuation methods, and then we're going to cover some key results from the valuation. As I said, informational only, no board action needed today. But before we do look at some of that actuarial stuff, I want to take a look at this great looking new report you have. I've never done this before. This is a screenshot of the cover of your report. And these are actual police and firefighter photos from your membership from around the state. And I've never seen any other valuation that does this. I think this is the coolest thing. I want to give a shout out to the folks that make this happen. Tammy goes out and finds all these great photos for us. We then provide all of this to legislative support services, and then they do all the graphics and put this all together. So yeah, I'm doing the numbers, but they make them all look better than I probably deserve. So I want to give a shout out to them. So if you haven't received this report yet, you should be receiving a hard copy at some point, but I did leave a link in the back of this presentation to a PDF copy as well. So not only do you guys have one of the best funded statuses in the nation, but you definitely have the best looking report, that is for sure. All right, so we are through the fun stuff, back to the actuarial grindstone here. A little more information on the 2020 off-cycle valuation. So under the current contribution rate setting cycle, these even numbered valuations like 2020 are off-cycle or non-rate setting. That just means they're an informational only update. We're looking at funding progress, we're looking at plan developments over the last year. So based on this sort of simplified informational only, we decided to do some new off-cycle valuation methods, and we simplified how we approach these valuations. That then had impacts on what we put in the report and how we are actually coming up with these results. So first of all, the impacts to the 2020 report, we're still providing, in my mind, the key valuation measures to check on funding progress over the last year. We're looking at funded status, liability changes, plan assets. Those are sort of the big three right there. The big one, the big change from prior reports is this report does not include updates to contribution rates. And so this clearly defines for us what an off-cycle report is, no contribution rates, and what an on-cycle report is, updates to contribution rates. But that's a change from prior reports. It also helps clarify that there's not as many contribution rates floating around out there. You'll only have contribution rates on on-cycle reports. Also under these new methods, we do have certain data details that are not available to it. That's sort of a side note. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that if you are comparing the reports. I want to do a quick overview of our new methods. Really what it boils down to here is that we are estimating 2020 data and assets by projecting the 2019 data file forward 1 year. This is really similar to projection information you've seen our office present, where we're showing you how left 2 looks in the future. We're taking a data file, we make assumptions on how it's going to change, and we're doing the same thing here. So we're relying on our assumptions for how that data is going to change from 1 year to the next. We did actually change or adjust some of our assumptions for actual known changes in the data, specifically salary growth, membership growth, and investment returns. We chose those three because those three tend to be pretty volatile from year to year, and they can have a pretty big impact on valuation results. So when we do this projection, this simplified approach, we do want to include those actual known quantities. And then finally, we did actually compare our projected data with actual data to ensure everything looked reasonable. We didn't just blindly rely on our assumptions without actually checking it with the data. And then we did extensive testing before running this new method out there. We tested a bunch of prior valuations, and we saw materially identical results. So that's what you're going to see when you're going to look through the results of the rest of this presentation. We're going to be looking at results under this new off-cycle method. And really what it boils down to, why are we even doing this? Well, this saves us a ton of time. We saved over 300 hours on the valuation by going to this more simplified approach, and we are essentially getting materially identical results. And so for a smaller agency like OSA, that sort of time savings is really big for us and allows us to better serve you and the rest of our clients. You can think of a ton of the work that we did this year with this time, the economic experience study, the report on financial condition. We're doing pricings, educational material, and so having those extra resources available to us is incredibly helpful. So before we actually do look at the 2020 valuation results, just a quick reminder on this valuation. This measures the system at June 30, 2020, so I know that was a little bit ago. The results of this do not include two big things that we've talked about, and that's the 2021 investment return and any changes to the economic assumptions that you may adopt today. So we talked about both of those in quite detail at the September meeting, but those occurred after this valuation date, so no impacts from those two items in these valuation results. So getting to our first actual result here, the market value of assets, we're going to focus on assets and funded status today, because those are the two big takeaways from this valuation. And for assets, we have the market value and the actuarial value. So starting out with the market value here, in this table, I compared the 2019 and then the 2020 market value. Top portion of the table, you have the beginning market value, and then you have 4 changes to that market value: contributions, disbursements, investment returns, and then any OSA adjustments we made. That was just for the benefit improvement account change in 2019. And then finally, you get to your ending market value of assets. So for 2020, looking down the 2020 column, the big note here, as it is almost every year with assets, is that investment return line. So that was a 4.55% for the year ending June 30, 2020. And that is actually lower than the assumption of 7.4%. So investments came in a little lower than expected for 2020. And it's actually sort of amazing that 2020 even ended in a positive investment return. We think back to 2020, markets absolutely melted down in March and then staged an incredible recovery to actually give us a positive investment return by June. So 4.55%, still though lower than the assumed return of 7.4%. So now moving to the actuarial value of assets. This is where we take the market value and we smooth past investment gains and losses, and then we recognize them over time. We've talked quite a bit about this, but I'll walk you through the table here on how we calculated that for 2020. Starting at the top portion of the table, that is the market value of assets we saw on the last slide. Moving down into the table, we have the deferred investment gains and losses. And these are all the investment gains and losses from prior years that we are still going to be recognizing in the future. So looking at the plan year ending 6/30/2020 line, that negative 265 million. So investments came in lower than expected for 2020, 4.55%. So we are going to be recognizing that portions of that asset loss over the next few years, and that was at negative 265. So going down the plan year ending all the way to the second to last teal row there, the total deferred investment gains and losses. That's if we sum up all the deferrals from all those past plan years, and that gets us to a positive 53 million. That means as of 2020, we are still deferring, even with the 2020 loss, still deferring 53 million in gain. So now tying it all together here, we get the actuarial value by taking that market value and subtracting off the total deferral, and that gets us to a total actuarial value of about 4.5 billion. So that was a lot of words explaining how we're calculating the actuarial value of assets. What's the big takeaway here? The big takeaway here is that this is the smallest level of deferred investment gains in the last 15 years. I had to go back to the 2004 valuation to where we had a smaller total deferred investment gain. So what that means is, as of 2020, we have about an even market value and actuarial value. Obviously, based on our September presentation, we know that there's a very large 2021 investment return, which then we're going to smooth a large portion of that over future years. But as of 2020, really close market value and actuarial value. So moving on to our last measure here, changes in funded status from the last valuation. Quick reminder on what funded status is. That's where we take the actuarial value of assets we saw on the last slide and we divide it by the accrued liability. And the accrued liability is the amount of benefits members have earned on the valuation date. So we're really comparing assets on a date and earned benefits on a given date. So looking up at this little graphic I have up here, the accrued liability is in the teal bar and the actuarial value of assets is in the blue bar. Whenever the blue bar is bigger than the teal bar, we have a funded status greater than 100%. For 2019, funded status was 111%, and then for 2020, the funded status was 113%. So a 2% increase in funded status from 2019 to 2020. I'll go ahead and answer the very obvious question that may come up here, and that's, hey, for 2020, we had an investment return that was less than expected. How come funded status still went up? And funded status still went up because the past deferred gains outweighed the asset losses from 2020. So we still had some gains on the books that we were still needed to be recognized through the great returns of 2010 to 2020, and those outweighed the losses from the 4.55 investment. So a couple other notes on funded status. Funded status greater than 100% doesn't necessarily mean the plan is overfunded. The opposite is true as well. Funded status less than 100% doesn't necessarily mean it's underfunded. There's a number of factors for a plan we want to consider before drawing conclusions from funded status. Yet some of these factors that we consider, and this is not an exhaustive list at all, but is the plan open and closed? What do the demographics look like? Are there deferred asset gains or losses on the book? Now looking at Left 2 specifically, Left 2 is an open plan, the demographics are stabilizing. We saw that there's very few deferred gains or losses. And so overall, Left 2 is a healthy plan. It's really in a great place. So summarizing everything I told you here real quick, the plan is really healthy. The board has done an excellent job managing this plan. We saw that those deferred assets offset the lower than expected returns for 2020, and that the funded status still exceeds 100%. Looking to the future here, our 2021 on-cycle valuation, that will include those really strong 2021 asset returns, as well as any changes to economic assumptions you may adopt in this meeting. And then we'll be presenting contribution rates from that valuation, as well as the whole valuation in June of 2022. So a little bit earlier cycle for those on-cycle valuations, because that's when you actually update contribution rates, and it's more than just an informational update like it is today. I will point out here that the board has already adopted rates for the 2023-25 biennium, but consistent with your prior policy, you can update those rates based on the 2021 valuation if you so choose. So with that, that wraps up my presentation. Oops, disclosure slide, can't get away without one, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mitch. Are there questions for Mitch? Check it. Not seeing any questions. Mitch, you did a good job. Look at that.
Cool. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, number 6 looks like the Roth deferred option. And that looks, we're back to Jacob.
Okay. So the issue in front of the board here is that Left 2 members have requested a Roth 457 plan option in the state's DCP plan. As I will discuss later in the presentation, this has been an ongoing request by members that the board has looked into in the past. So a reminder, what is a Roth 457 plan? It allows for contributions to be made after taxes. These contributions are called Roth contributions. Roth contributions to a 457 plan, along with the investment returns from those contributions, are not taxed when a member withdraws them from the plan, like they would be with a traditional 457. The earnings from the earnings not being taxed is a significant benefit to younger members whose contributions would accumulate earnings tax-free for a longer time. So why is this option not currently available in DCP? So DRS is the plan administrator for DCP, and they do have the authority to implement a Roth option without legislation. In 2014, the board actually sent some of you may remember this, the board sent a letter to DRS requesting that they offer a Roth option to DCP. And then since 2014, DRS has presented to the Left 2 board multiple times their intent to implement a Roth option for DCP. And I should add, I was one of those people when I worked at DRS who presented to the board that was the plan. So initially, DRS cited issues with changing record keepers for DCP with the delay in implementing a Roth option. Since 2014, DRS has actually changed record keepers twice, and that is a pretty involved process to do that, taking up a lot of resources at DRS. In 2021, DRS informed the board that they were no longer prioritizing resources to implement a Roth plan option at this time. When we reached out for more information about why that was, they told us that they were, it was because most DCP participants are not contributing a maximum amount to their 457 plan. And then this issue came up at the select committee after Steve presented there on some of the issues that the Left 2 board was going to be looking at this interim, and mentioned this as one of those. At a select committee meeting, the director of DRS, Director Guerin, also explained that the cost of implementing a Roth option would cause an increase in the administrative fee that all DCP members pay. And since most DCP members would likely not use the Roth option, that it was not fair to the other members to have to pay for this benefit. So I last presented to the board on this issue back in June. And since that time, DRS has provided more detail about their concerns and actually changed their position about not pursuing a Roth option at this time. In July, DRS gave a presentation at the select committee that identified more detail regarding why they had not were not planning on implementing a Roth option. Some of those issues identified were that the previous related implementations were of a higher priority. Those included the record keeper transitions I already mentioned, auto enrollment, and then a new employer reporting application, which was a large IT project that they've undergone. Also, the generally low take-up rates for Roth options. They had worked with their record keeper and done additional research and found that they could expect around 12% of employees to take advantage of the Roth option. And they found that it was really, there was limited interest, but those participants that were interested in this option tended to be very vocal about that interest, that these were people who were typically saved a lot of money, were really utilized DCP. Also, they cited added complexity for both employers and customers. And then the cost and effort of implementation, which I'll talk more about in, I believe, the next slide or the slide after that. And without, once again, without legislative funding, the cost, those additional costs would have to be paid by the DCP participants. And then also they cited that the cost to the employer community was unknown, that there may be some cost for employers to have to report this information of whether the member wanted to put their money into traditional DCP or Roth DCP, that might be a cost to the employer. And actually, I did include a copy of the presentation materials from that meeting in your materials. So in September, DRS, I mentioned that DRS had changed their position on this. And in September, DRS filed a budget proposal with the governor's office to implement a Roth 457 option. The budget request is for general fund money, meaning that this would get around that one of their main concerns of increasing the administrative fee to all DCP members And so that budget request, so quick breakdown of what the costs were, and the governor's budget is scheduled to be released on December 21st, which does create a bit of an issue for the board because the board's December meeting is December 15th. So the board will not know whether that request made it into the governor's budget before the last meeting of this interim. So not all Left 2 members have access to the state's DCP plan. So I want to just provide you a little bit of data about who actually has access to it in the Left 2 community. So local employers must opt into the state's DCP program. 67% of employers are enrolled. And from those employers, 40% of Left 2 members are enrolled in DCP. And as I mentioned before, DRS estimates that approximately 12% would utilize the Roth option. So that would be around 420 Left 2 members that they could expect to use it. But I would say that generally, at least anecdotally, you hear a lot that Left 2 members tend to be more involved in using DCP and other retirement savings programs. So I wouldn't be surprised if the uptake was a bit higher than average in the Left 2 community. So there's no action from the board required today, but the policy options identified by staff would be to take no action at this time. The board could choose to not pursue legislation this session, since DRS has submitted a budget request, could choose to let that process play out this year. And if they're not successful, revisit this issue next year. The board may also go with option 2 to endorse legislation. And the board could do that in case the budget request from DRS is either cut out of the governor's budget or doesn't make it into the final budget passed by the legislature. And the next steps on this issue, as I said, no action necessary at today's meeting, and the plan is for a final briefing at the December board meeting. And I should add that the DRS director, Director Guerin, will be providing, or at least her or her staff, I'm not sure, will be providing an annual update to the board next month. So there is the opportunity there if any board members want to ask DRS questions directly. And if DRS is not successful, I should add they could still choose to implement a Roth option. If they're not successful of getting into the budget, the governor's budget, they could choose to implement a Roth option, but that would result in that increase to the administrative fee for DCP participants. I did ask them whether, if they're not in the governor's budget, whether they would pursue that option. And it sounded like it was unlikely, which makes sense if they work for the governor's office and the governor does not make that a priority, that they would likely not choose to pursue that, but that it would depend on the feedback they got from the governor's office. So that concludes my presentation today. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Jason, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more of a comment, I think, than anything else, because I know we don't need to take action, but it would seem prudent to wait on this issue, given that there seems to be some, or at least 2 moving targets that we don't really have information on. So I don't know if that means we'd have to wait until January. Would that be accurate, Jacob, being that we're meeting before the budget comes out, and of course at that point our next meeting is in January?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Are there other questions? Sorry. Scan through. All right. Jacob, I don't see any other questions and no motions before us, so I assume the action taken is none. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Looking at number 7 is the administrative update. Mr. Nelson.
Well, this will be brief, although I want to make sure you have time to answer questions. There haven't been presentations by staff at stakeholder meetings. There's nothing scheduled to come up in the next month. I did want to point out that one of the board members, Representative Bergquist, made a presentation at the International Foundation for Employee Benefit Plan Conference about communicating with elected officials, and it was very well received. His panelist on that was a former board member as well, Kelly Fox. So I did want to mention that. And then well, actually going back since prior to October, yeah, since that time, the fire commissioners did have a meeting, and Tim Valencia was there with a table to represent the board at that meeting as well, and answer questions that members might have. But with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
I'm not seeing any hands, and I'm checking the chat room as well. We're good, Steve.
All right.
All right, number 8 on the item is the economic assumption adoptions.
Yeah, let's.
I know that's you, Steve. So.
Yes.
Look at you showing all your IT skills.
All right. So my background, the board has the duty to adopt economic assumptions for LEF Plan 2. Every 2 years, you get a report on economic conditions from the state actuary, and those your adoption of those assumptions, it comes out of those recommendations. In 2019, there weren't any recommended changes. The last time there were any recommended changes was back in 2017. But this year, there were recommended changes. So by way of background, there was the inflation assumption was recommended to stay the same. There was a modest decrease in the economic assumption for salary growth. This is different from the demographic salary growth assumption. So this is more sort of like the effect of the economy, if you will. And then the big one was the lowering the assumed investment return from the current 7.4 in LEF 2 to 7.0. You have a number of different options. You could adopt all the assumptions, or only, there was some discussion about adopting only the investment return assumption. That question came up a couple months ago, and OSA provided some information to the board, which I'll cover, or you could not adopt these. I will say the Pension Funding Council has taken action on and adopted all of these assumptions for all the other plans. So on your screen now is the information that was presented by OSA regarding the impact of adopting all the recommended assumption changes. As you'll see from that, the funded ratio slide on the chart is a little bit, the impact of the assumption adoption is hidden because that also includes the impact of the investment returns that you saw that Mitch talked about earlier. So even though you adopt these more conservative assumptions, you see that projected funded ratio increasing up to 123% in June of 2025. But on the far right, you can kind of see the impact on the base rates. And in particular, if you look at the 2023-25 biennium slice there, that doesn't include the rates in there. So that's the where we're talking about the minimum rates. There you can start to see that assumption come in. So absent the change in assumptions, the 100% of the minimum rate would be 8.53 for next biennium, and that would go up about 65 basis points to 9.18. That's the member rate, but they would have the same identical effect on employers and the state. So that gives you a rough idea of the impact on the rates from adopting these assumptions. Here, Matt, OSA provided in response to questions from the board members, what would things look like if you only did the investment return assumption and you didn't do the economic salary growth change? And you can see that this makes things a little bit more conservative. So instead of hitting 123%, for instance, in June of 2025, the new projected funded ratio would be 121%. And you can see the minimum rate. The new 100% minimum rate would go from 8.53 to 9.47. So instead of 65 basis points, you're looking at a little over 94 basis points. Now, oh, I lost my, apologize, lost my slides. So let me go back to the options that are before you, and then we can answer any questions that you have. First off, I guess, are there any questions about the actuarial impacts or any of those slides that were presented?
I've seen it, Steve. No questions. I like to see it.
Okay, then Mr. Chair, then a motion would be in order to get into discussion, I guess, on the assumptions.
Right.
I'll make a motion for option 1. This is a day.
Got you, Ade. So your motion is to adopt option number 1, adopt all the recommended assumption changes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconds from there. All right. So before us, we have a motion. Motion been made and second. It is in order. Discussion.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Mark Johnston.
Go ahead, Mark.
So I'll speak in favor of the motion. We are generalists. The actuaries are the experts, and I've seen other presentations from other actuaries about the assumed rate of return and moving forward their long-term assumptions. And I think we should comply with what the actuary recommends and adopt all the recommended assumption changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Other comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Jason. I second Mark's comments.
Thank you, Jason. Right, Steve, I'm not seeing any other comments. So before us is a motion to adopt option number 1, adopt all the recommended assumptions. Again, it has been seconded. It is in order. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank you. All right, Steve.
All right.
Looks like number 9 is that meeting calendar, which I know was shared by the team at our October meeting. So I don't know if we've had any changes.
Have there, has any board members provided input about recommending changes that you wanted to discuss with the entire group?
Steve, the only thing I mentioned to you was the March meeting, but that I think you discussed, or you mentioned to me that the March 23rd meeting, as scheduled now, because the session ending or hoping to end right around that March 10th or 11th date, can't remember which one it was, that meeting also would be kind of a interim type meeting.
Yeah, the plan is for all the meetings during session to be virtual meetings, and the agenda would simply be an administrative update and a legislative update.
Okay. So our first potentially meeting in person, if we're able to do so by then, or at least start discussing on the items, would be our April meeting.
Yes.
Okay. I do know that looking at the calendar, and we've had this conversation before, is we have November and December, and there's 2 yellow dots or 2 yellow squares as options for us to consider. And I don't know if we need to do it today.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can take action today, that allows us to go ahead and get things booked with the SIB and published with the code revisor's office ahead of time. If you need more time to talk about those meeting dates based on the discussion that you have today, we can adopt in December. But if you're ready to go ahead and adopt today, make a decision on November and December and adopt the calendar today, that would be preferred.
I'll put it out there. It looks like November meeting. My preference would be the 16th, but it's in the middle of the month. And it's kind of in that ballpark with the 19th of the previous month, just a couple days early. Is there any preference?
So, Mr. Chair, I'd agree.
Mark, go ahead. Sorry, man.
Go ahead, Mark.
Nope, 16th is good for me. Just to chime in.
Jason?
Yes, 16th, I would prefer the 16th, and on December, I'd prefer the 14th if possible.
I agree.
I'm kind of liking those. Adeg?
Yeah, same.
Yep, I think I'll go with both on November 16 and December 14.
All right. Jason, you got your hand up again there. Okay, got it. Tarina, I think you said also you like the 16th and the 14th. Is that correct?
That's okay.
Okay, I'm looking through, making sure I'm not missing anybody. All right. Steve, do we need a motion?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Sorry,
the calendar would need to be adopted.
All right, Senator Holy, I think. Go ahead.
So moved.
Perfect. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll make the motion that we accept the calendar as presented with the options in November of the 16th and December of the 14th.
Second.
Got it. We have a motion's been made to adopt the calendar as presented with the selection of November 16th and December 14th. The motion is in order. It has been seconded. Is there discussion? Senator Rivers, did I miss you by chance? I apologize.
No, I seconded it.
Okay, good. Okay, just making sure. Just making sure. All right. All those in favor? I guess make discussion real quick. I know we kind of bounced around. If there's anybody got any comments before we go? Looking through the screens. All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Good work, everyone. All right, Steve, I think that it takes care of our calendar. We've identified, and I think, Steve, the August meeting, we handle that later in the year. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's historically it is scheduled, and then depending on how things go at the start of the interim, if you guys feel like you whether you need it or not, you'll decide then.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so before us, the slide is just a reminder of our December 15th, 9:30 meeting, our last meeting of the year. Jump in, obviously with our meeting, we've got a few things we're going to take care of by then. And I think probably the big item, which most of us have been working on now, seems like for a while, will be that bill presentation. I would assume that the staff's going to come back with something for us to look at.
Yeah, the plan, Jacob will be doing the final presentation on that. We'll have bill language and a final presentation on all the policy issues that have been adopted by the board. And we'll have whatever actuarial information OSA is able to complete in this sort of expedited time frame.
Steve, is there anything else that you want to report on before we go, before I look for a motion to adjourn, or your team? Are we good?
We're good.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. Oh, Ade. Sorry, buddy.
Oh, so I think I just want to state something for the record. I think, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate your outreach efforts in the last two months, and especially on the issues that we voted on today. So I think I thank you, and I think it's something that were done probably behind the scene that may not be so evident to a lot of people. I think some work, some information that was shared before the committee meeting. So I really appreciate your leadership and how things have been done. So thank you.
Thank you, Ade. And I'd also recognize my partner, Jason, from the other side for making a few contacts as well. Collectively, we are a group that works very well together. I tell people I'm very proud of what we accomplish. And I know that we have a small piece of it, because behind the scenes, of course, is like that, and the wizard is Steve and his entire team behind that curtain, and they do a great job for us. But maintaining good dialogue with each of you, talking about the issues ahead of time, making sure that we're all on the same page provides all of us a better product, which in turn keeps our membership happy, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So I thank all of you. Thanks, everybody. So. All right, for us is entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Senator, holy, make me laugh. So. All right, motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, click off. Those who want to stay and talk to Steve about pensions, go ahead and stay on.